Hello, friends. How are you? I When I hit the record or when I hit the go live button, my what I see on my side, it's this kind of black film. So I don't get a chance to see what I look like until it goes live, and then I look at it and go, "Huh, my hair does not look up to par." So anyway, I hope and pray everyone's doing well. Here we are, part six of God Dwells Among Us. And again, what we're discussing is what God has done to be able to come and be with us as humans. Okay, what did God do? And so we first see Eden, where God created this place where the presence of God existed. And then from there, it was meant to spread out and to go forth. Okay, but what happens? Humans messed it up. So then God comes to the patriarchs and says, and points out these little places, okay, in the promised land where God says, this is where I'm at. And where I'm at, it's going to be different. It's going to be unique. It's going to be separate. Not because I'm a God that demands that things be separate just because they're separate. No, he's separating it out so that people will notice and people will take a look and go, that's the God of Israel. That's the God who does things. Uh, that's the God who does things differently, where they take care of the poor, they take care of the alien, they take care of the sojourner, they take care of the widow, they take care of the orphan. So that when people look at them, they go, okay, that God is different. That God is unique. And if he's unique and doing all these things, changing who these people are, okay, into being better people, then that's what I want. And so God intended that with his presence in Eden, and then with the patriarchs, with Bethel, and with other places, and with Moses and the burning bush. And so in God's place is unique. And then when God calls Israel out of Egypt and they go to Mount Sinai, okay, that place where God was dwelling, he says, is to be separate, is to be set apart. Okay, so that you know it's coming from me, it's coming from who I am. And then, as the nation of Israel was wandering around in the wilderness, God says, I want you to build a tabernacle. I want you to build a tent of the meeting. That's what that literally means when we see the word tabernacle. I want you to build it so that then my presence can come and dwell among my people. And so they built a tabernacle and they did extreme work with it. And they did very detailed work. Yes, ma'am. One of the other iPads is connected to the speaker. Can I go disconnect the Give me just a second. And so you see where God is giving this insane amount of detail, okay, for what the tabernacle is going to be. All right. And when I say insane, I just mean it very, very meticulous on what it is to be like. And so then as the people build it, God's presence comes. And then, even though Israel said, God, you're not real, build a golden calf, all right, still rejected God. And God said, okay, you're going to wander around, even though you saw me do all of these amazing, wonderful things, okay, in Egypt. You're not going to see the promised land, but my presence will still be with you. And so then, as the nation of Israel comes into the promised land, the tabernacle goes away for some reason. The Ark of the Covenant is still there, and that's something that represented where the Ark of the Covenant was. That's where God's presence was, but it wasn't a good luck charm. The nation of Israel in the book of First Samuel tried to take the Ark of the Covenant and put it, okay, with in the battle that they were having with the Philistines, and the Philistines won. even with the Ark of the Covenant there. So that tells us something that kind of leads us into today. God's presence is not relegated to a tabernacle or a place. It's not relegated to an object. Because, see, what that represents is that you're saying this is where God's presence is, but only if we are reflecting that image, if we are reflecting his presence. And see, and this is where it's going to get really cool next week. All right. To where when we talk about how Jesus, comes and dwells among us. All right. But that's next week. So, but we got to have this lead up to it, this kind of trajectory here of, okay, things are really cool. Now they're really, really going to get cool. At least for me, I think it's just incredible how God designed and how God has been consistent, with what he does. And then when he comes and changes us, how we are to react to be that icon that I talked about, I think in week part 1 or part 2, of we are just, when people click on our lives and look into our lives, they're clicking into something deeper, than just us. So anyway, we have we have the tabernacle, but the tabernacle goes away, but God's presence is still with Israel. The Ark of the Covenant, which was sacred and holy, but yet it wasn't a good luck charm. God didn't say, just because you have that, you automatically have me. No, what he was saying is, my presence is going to be in the icon of that, but only if you are reflecting what I want you to be and what I desire for you to be. And so anyway, the tabernacle goes away when Israel comes into the promised land. The Ark of the Covenant, was built and it was placed in a home, but it was never had its own temple, never had a permanent spot, never had a permanent place. And so David, when he is realizing that, hey, I have this castle, I have this palace, but yet God doesn't have a place. And so he has the idea, you know what, I want to build God a house. And God says, look, you've been a man of war, and I can't have you build my house, but I'm going to have your son do it, Solomon. And so anyway, he says, okay, and he gets all the stuff ready so that when it's Solomon's time, he can build God a temple. And again, an extreme amount of detail went into building this place. And it was an amazing, amazing structure. But yet God's not relegated to just that place. It's a place that represents who he is, but it's not the only place where he can be. Because in the prayer of the dedication, I believe it's in First Chronicle. No, it could be in Second Chronicles. I'll have to double check. I'm sorry. Right now my mind is going back and forth saying, no, it's First Chronicles. No, it's Second Chronicles. All right. And so anyway, in the Chronicles where Solomon is there and Solomon is giving the prayer of the dedication of the temple, he says, we've built this place for you, but can we really build a place that fully encompasses you? And of course, Solomon says no. This is just our feeble attempt, at bringing a place that can reflect your glory. And so, and when they build it, God's presence comes into the temple. And on that day, they have lots of sacrifices. They have lots of burnt offerings. What we see from Leviticus the rules in place as far as what God says. Hey, look, when you come before me, and you bring your sin and you bring your confession to me, and you doing these things, again, God is saying, this gives me great pleasure, okay, that you're seeking forgiveness, that you're seeking repentance, that you're wanting to follow my way. But yet at the same time, God's saying, look, what you have is just a representation. It's not the full thing. Because where God has consistently, from Eden all the way up until the temple, and we're about to talk about after the temple here in a little bit, but even up until the temple, it's not been where God's presence resides. It's been on whom does God's presence reside. Because it rested on the priest, it rested on Solomon, it rested on David, it rested on Saul, it rested on Samuel, it rested on the judges, it rested on Joshua, it rested on Moses, it rested on there. But even when those humans messed up, okay, and sinned against God, God's presence wasn't fully removed. But yet at the same time, why would God put such an emphasis on a temple? There had to be a place where there was a representation of who God was. And in that place, it had to be special and it had to be unique. But at the same time, it could not be the object of the worship. Because as we see, once the temple is built and after Solomon dies and the nation of Israel splits into two parts, once we see that and we see how Israel and Judah, Israel being in the north and Judah being in the south, Israel and Judah as a nation, very little, okay, act like God, especially in Israel. Israel, the northern kingdom, was just full of very bad kings. Judah had its share of bad kings, but it also had some good ones. But we see that whenever those kings and whenever those people weren't acting like God, God is trying to say, look, if you don't straighten up, if you don't act the way that I require, then it doesn't matter what temple you have. It doesn't matter where you worship. My presence can't be there because you're not reflecting who I am. And so eventually the temple gets destroyed in 586 BC by Babylon. The Assyrian army in uh, I want to say, I can't remember the year right now, but the Assyrian army had taken the northern kingdom. Okay, and it was in 700, I want to say. And then in 586, and it was through several invasions, but anyway, in 586, the temple is leveled. Okay, but does God's presence completely go away? No, because at that point, when Babylon destroyed the temple, they took a large majority of the Israelites, okay, of the Jews, sent them to Babylon, okay, and while they're at Babylon, okay, there's a debate. How long are we going to be here? Are we going to be here for just a few years, or are we going to be here for the 70 years that Jeremiah talked about? And Ezekiel comes to them and says, look, God says that he wants you to build houses and plant gardens and have your kids and marry off your kids and build a place here because I'm needing the land to rest because you didn't do what I required of you. So here's the cool part. If the temple's not there, Just like we saw the tabernacle not being there when the people came into the promised land. Okay, and now there's no temple after it's been destroyed. Where does God's presence reside? Again, it's not where, it's on whom. Because if the nation of Israel was mistreating the poor, mistreating the orphan, doing terrible things, did God really want that temple to reflect who he was? No. Okay. Just like if we're walking around in our life, we're not taking care of the poor, taking care of the needy, taking care of the downtrodden, taking care of the ones that can't do anything for us. If we're not doing those things, can God's presence really reflect on us? No. Because when people click on it and they're seeing a completely different life than what God would have, does it matter where we are or what title we hold? No, it doesn't at all. So it's not where, it's on whom. Because if I go to the temple with the mindset, and we're going to see this in Jesus next week, if I go to the temple with the mindset that, Lord, I need my sins forgiven, not for the benefit of, yes, for the benefit of me, for my sins forgiven, but yet I want my sins forgiven so that there's no barrier between me and you, so I can reflect who you are, so that I can be that icon to where people click on my life and they see a God who's unique and a God who's different. So even though there was a tabernacle built with great amount of detail, it wasn't where, it was on whom. And then when it got to the temple, it's not where, it's on whom. Because the temple prayer even said, can this place really even hold your name? No, it can't. When the temple was destroyed, what did the nation of Israel do? They still had their synagogue. They still prayed. We see that in Daniel. They still married and were given in marriage and built such a community that when it was time to go home to Israel, there was a generation that said, no, we're going to stay here in Babylon. So you have these people, okay? You have these Jews, okay, that are, again, they even wrote their own Talmud, all right, which was kind of a commentary on the Torah, on the Old Testament, to where they were sitting there writing. And so we have the Babylonian Talmud and we have the Jerusalem Talmud. Okay. And so we have these, then they conflict a little bit, but not horrifically. But you have these people that were saying, we realize that God can exist here even without a temple. But there were some who said, look, God has called us back to where we should be. God has called us back so that we can rebuild a temple in a place, okay, to where it can be a reflection of who God is. Because when we get to Jesus next week, and Jesus is talking to the woman in Samaria, which was the northern tribe that was taken away, okay, and the northern tribe was never returned like the southern tribe was. And the northern tribe intermarried and they assimilated into the Assyrian culture and they became the Samaritans. The Samaritans were partly Jewish and they were looked down upon by the southern tribe. But Jesus looks at the woman at the well and she says, look, why are you really the Messiah? Because we have a place where there's a temple, but the people in Jerusalem say that's really not the right place. And Jesus says, look, whether it's in this place or that place, there's going to be a part and a time when my presence will still exist, but it's not going to be relegated to Jerusalem or to here. So, folks, next week, it's some good stuff. But I needed to give all of this kind of backstory leading up to the trajectory I talked about, leading up to what's taking place. Because next week, okay, when we start talking about who Jesus is and we start talking about his presence among us, there are so many correlations that I can't wait to delve into it. So anyway, next week we'll get into it. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his face to you and give you peace. Blessings and peace, my friends and family. And if you have any questions about today, please send me an email, pastordoug1973@gmail.com. You can also put in the comments. I'm not sure which way I'm pointing, but anyway, I think the comments are over here. And then also click on the bell, get the notifications, know when I'm going live. So anyway, y'all take care. God bless.